The title of this webinar is Defining Accessibility, Services, Programs, and Technology. And our facilitators for this session are Joshua Berkov, who is the Collections Management Librarian, and Clint Exum, who's the Outreach Specialist at the North Carolina Library for the Blind and Physically Handicapped. And with that, I will hand it over to the two of them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Just 1 second, just trying to begin the slideshow here. All right, we'll do it for the. Oops.
So thank you. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Clint Exum. I've been with the library for about 5 years now. What I do as an outreach specialist is help promote the library services by hosting outreach events and attending different events, and also through social media. I also serve as the backup volunteer coordinator and assist in the production of our library's talking book and magazine collection.
And I'm Josh Berkov. I'm the collection management librarian for the North Carolina Library for the Blind and Physically Handicapped. I'm in charge of all things collections related, from acquisitions to technical services to maintaining the collection. I get to decide what we record on site. I make selections for our large print collection. I get to purchase, I basically get to spend other people's money on purchasing additions to our collection. And it's a lot of fun. I've been there 7 years this week. So, yep, that's a little bit about me.
All right, so today we'll share with you our experiences serving patrons with disabilities. Our library patrons aren't always able to browse our collection in the library. They usually call in, order the books, or download them from our online service, Braille and audio reading download, called BARD. We do host programs in which we interact with our patrons, such as tactile tours, speaking engagements, dinners, and luncheons, and now virtual programs. We hope our experiences serving our community can help improve how you deliver customer service to your patrons with disabilities. So with that, we'll first talk about customer service. Or actually, we have a poll for you first.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you define accessibility? The effort we put into make services available for anyone despite disability, practices that allow all groups to have the same level of access to a service, ensuring people with barriers that those barriers won't deny them from something anyone else could obtain, or all the above. Okay, so the correct answer was all the above. All these answers are correct. So if you pick one, or if you pick A, B, or C, then just know that you're on the right track, and we're just going to cover all the different ways we can help make our service accessible to our community. All right, so let's go ahead to the customer service section of our presentation.
Okay. Uh-oh. There we go. Okay, so customer service and accessibility. Just a couple of tips. If you notice a patron coming in and they appear to be in need of help, introduce yourself by name and as a staff member and ask them how you may assist them. If they need assistance navigating, offer your arm to hold on to. If they have a guide dog, remember that the guide dogs are service animals and it could be a risk to do anything that may distract the dog from his or her duty. It is probably best to just ignore the dog and let him or her perform the duties required by the patron. Even though it's tempting to want to pet the dog, it's probably better that you don't. If you're giving directions to a patron with visual impairments, it can be helpful to give them very detailed directions, and you can even go so far as to give them directions using a sort of a clock metaphor. For example, if someone is asking where the restroom is, you could let them know that the restroom is at 2 o'clock on their right. A lot of visually impaired people are pretty savvy at using clock metaphor for figuring out directions. Also, make sure you have walkways cleared of debris. Now, full disclaimer, our mission as the Library for the Blind for the state means that for the most part, we serve patrons who have visual impairments. Now, some of them may also be hard of hearing and some of them may be deaf-blind, but we do not exclusively serve patrons who are only deaf. So the information that we are providing to you today comes more from our research than our own practices with regard to those who are deaf or hard of hearing. And here's some tips. If you don't know American Sign Language, keep a pencil and paper handy to communicate with deaf or hard of hearing customers. If talking on the phone and they're having a hard time understanding you, offer other methods of communication like email or a chat service if available. If a patron has an interpreter, keep in mind you're helping the patron and not the interpreter. Speak with the person, not the interpreter. In other words, maintain eye contact with the patron rather than the interpreter. We've included a link to a tip sheet from ALA for serving deaf and hard of hearing patrons. You may also wish to familiarize your staff with how telecommunication relay services work. A telecommunications relay service, or TRS, provides a communications assistant that allows people who are deaf, hard of hearing, or speech impaired to communicate with people who use a standard telephone. A TRS offers two options: voice carryover and hearing carryover. Voice carryover allows a person with a hearing impairment to speak directly to the other party and then read the response typed by the communication assistant. The hearing carrying over allows a person with a speech impairment to hear the other party and relay the typed response back to the telephone user through the communications assistant. This service allows individuals with communication disorders to communicate with all telephone users. A little bit on mobility etiquette. So if you are interacting with patrons who are in wheelchairs, when speaking with someone in a wheelchair for an extended period, it's beneficial to find a way to speak at eye level with the customer by finding a place to sit so there is no neck strain on the patron trying to look up at you. Offer to help hold books, but never assume that your help will always be wanted. And I think that's something we've all learned the hard way, one way or another. Always respect a patron's wishes in regards to assistance. Always ask before finding ways to assist a patron with a disability. There may be times where offering to help will trigger a negative response and your help will not be wanted. They may have a reason they don't wish to disclose, but just let them know that if they need anything, you are available. So short version is, don't try to force yourself on someone. And Clint is going to talk about accessible library programming considerations.
Thank you. All right, so here are just a few considerations that will or factors that you want to consider when hosting a library program. So one thing you'll want to consider is the location. Will it be in the section of the building that can only be accessed by stairs? Is there a ramp or elevator available to make the space accessible? Also consider the layout of the area. If it's a program that will require movement, it's great to consider open paths so assistive equipment can be operated smoothly. If you're having participants who are doing an activity at a table, it would be good to have tables or surfaces of varying heights if possible, so assistive equipment may fit. And let's see. When you're catering event and serving food, if you're serving food to people who are visually impaired, ask if they need assistance, let them know what their food choices are. And if you do serve them their plate, you can use the clock method to let them know where the food is. Just let them know, well, you have something at 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 3 o'clock. Always, when you're hosting a program, always let people know where the emergency exit locations are as well. Can you move to the next slide? Thank you. So when promoting events, if you're using Facebook, you want to make sure that if you're using an image to promote on Facebook, you can add text to the description. So any text that would be on the image is accessible to people who are visually impaired. You can also use alt text to describe images that you post online. And to do that, you can go to the photo settings on just whenever you're uploading a Facebook photo on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, you can see the option to add alt text. And in the alt text, you're just going to kind of describe what the photo is. So for this photo, for a program that we were promoting a couple of weeks ago, I pretty much just described it as a hand or a lantern is being held and illuminating the text, and the text says "History's mysteries, spies in plain sight." And I've also let them know about the registration information. You can also see that the real program information is in the status. So another thing you want to consider when doing promotions is using large print. So in general, just using large print makes the promotions kind of separates it from a document from an actual promotion. And also it's an added bonus for people who are visually impaired and need a larger print. And also consider placing your promotions at eye level if you're promoting around your library, so people of varying heights can see it. Another thing to consider is getting your promotions converted to Braille. So if you have any Brailling resources, or doesn't necessarily have to be the promotions, but if a patron or an attendee needed a program guide that needed to be accessible, you could consider Brailling resources to make a Braille guide for them. All right, next slide, please. All right, so one great way to account for people with disabilities attending library programs is to include in the message, in the promotions, to notify staff in a timely manner what sort of accommodations would be needed. So if a person with a disability is attending, this way the library staff can have adequate time to make something specifically accessible for the program. So if you need interpreters for sign language, captioning services, if you need different space requirements, if you know you're going to have service animals there, that's something that you can be prepared for. All right, again, we don't have a lot of experience with patrons who are deaf and hard of hearing. So these are just some resources that we found. So if you don't know American Sign Language, but you need that service for an event that you're holding, you can find a directory on the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services website, and they'll have a list of people who provide sign language services in the different regions of North Carolina. The induction loop system allows people with a hearing aid implant they'll be able to receive input from a microphone that's connected to the induction loop system. The next one is consider captions and transcriptions for different types of instructional videos that your library may produce. Next slide. All right, so now we'll talk about your online presence and accessibility. So one thing that you'll want to remember is that accessibility is good for everyone. Think about the curb cuts and how everyone reads captions and subtitles. When it comes to your website, you want to worry about the things that you can control. There are many different types of devices, and they can interact with browsers and websites in different ways. So the main thing you want to ask yourself is your website accessible? Is your online catalog accessible? You can work with your tech or IT department to see what kind of improvements or what are the standards that, what are some of the website standards when it comes to accessibility. So what was this? The section 508 is for government program accessibility is great training for online documents, for making online documents accessible like Word, Excel files, PDFs, and also the World Wide Web Consortium has a lot of great information and resources on designing accessible websites. And so we provided those links for you for additional information. Just reading some of the chat notes here. Okay, this is more information on the induction loop system, please. This is hardware that the organization must purchase. Yes, it is something that you have to purchase. So that is true. All right, so yes.
Go ahead.
Oh, I thought you were about to say something, sorry.
I was, but I'm going to wait till later.
Okay. All right, so we're going to move on to course management software. So we have Blackboard, Moodle, Canvas. They all come with similar accessibility functions. They've tested with different screen readers on different browsers. You can navigate using the headings and the ARIA landmarks by using the quick links. So you can jump directly from different headings by using Shift-Alt-L on some of them. Alt tags are used to describe the images. They're, the high contrast settings are respected on most of the systems. You can reorganize some of the items using the drag and drop function, and also provide full support for captions and all media types that you can upload or view within the course content. Let's see, next, Libguides. So when creating a Libguide, avoid copying and pasting text into the Libguides when possible, unless you know that the source text is accessible. We've included the source for a full guideline on accessibility in the notes of this slide. All right, so Zoom. So the accessibility settings to control the font size and also your screen reader. There are different keyboard shortcuts for Zoom features. There's an automatic transcript to make it easy to search and review meetings recorded in the cloud. And also there are third-party captioning providers options. So with Windows accessibility, this can be found in your ease of access on the in the Windows settings. So if you run Windows, you have access to a magnifier, which will take a section of your page and magnify on it. You have the narrator, which will be your screen reader, or read whatever's on the screen if it's accessible. You can change the contrast on your screen. So to make it easier to see something against a darker or lighter background, and as well as a touch screen board so that you can operate a keyboard with your mouse or an on-screen keyboard. And also it will respond to voice commands. So NVDA, or the non-visual desktop assistant, this is a program that you can download for free, and it allows the users to allows users to use a screen reader with the computer. So you can launch it from a jump drive in the event that your IT department won't allow you to turn on or install different softwares. You can use it for testing a screen narrator on your website and your online catalog. And yeah, it's completely free. Now for Android accessibility, if you are using a smartphone that's an Android or a tablet, you have access to various accessibility features, such as the screen reader, which supports talkback, select to speak, text to speech output, braille back. You can change the font and display size, high contrast, things in color inversions, color corrections. Let's see. Audio and on-screen texts. You can connect with hearing aids, live captions, sound amplifiers. You can change your notification settings, change the button settings so that you can use the power button to end calls. You can even use Morse code on with the Android accessibility. So that takes us to the other half or the other population of Apple. Josh, I'll let you take this one.
So first, a note about Android accessibility, and that especially with regards to Braille. As we all know, there are so many different flavors of the Android operating system. They don't all work equally well when trying to, say, stream Braille from a service onto the device or onto an e-Braille reader. So with that said, Apple is much more uniform in how its devices operate in a visually impaired environment. Here are some services that are available via Apple devices. There's auditory descriptions of on-screen elements, which help you easily navigate your screen, or through a Bluetooth keyboard, or simple gestures on a touch screen or trackpad, for example, with a MacBook. There are unique rotor gestures that function like a dial on the trackpad, and you can make content such as websites a breeze to browse. You can also use a refreshable Braille display connected via Bluetooth to your Apple device, or enter Braille directly on the touchscreen using Braille screen input. Braille is automatically converted to text in an on-screen panel display on Macs. so that sighted people can follow along with voiceover descriptions. And voiceover is really the overarching accessibility feature of the Apple ecosystem. VoiceOver reads most of the on-screen text aloud. It will also, you can also control the speed with which it reads the text. There are over 70 voices in over 35 languages. I've actually experimented with VoiceOver on my iPhone, and it's really quite an experience. If you have an iPhone, I really highly recommend you play around with it a little bit. It can be a little intimidating at first, but once you get the hang of it, you can kind of see just how useful it is to those who are visually impaired. For example, if you're looking at your home screen on an iPhone, and let's say, or maybe you're looking at the dock at the bottom and you want to press Safari to open up the web browser. Under most circumstances, you would just press it once and Safari would open right up. But when you have VoiceOver on, when you press Safari, it'll actually say Safari, and then you have to press it again in order to launch Safari. It's a great way for visually impaired users to be able to navigate around their iPhones and iPads, so that they're not accidentally clicking on apps or links that they don't actually want to open or execute. Okay. Now a little bit about accessible media. First up, here are a couple of organizations that you can go to, and these are, the first two are really more for students. There's Bookshare and Learning Ally, and both provide it's text-to-speech narrations of books, mostly textbooks, student usage books. And when I say text-to-speech, what I mean is it's a computer narration, a computer-generated voice narration rather than a human narration. Project Gutenberg has thousands and thousands of titles that are freely accessible on the web, and most screen readers can interact with them. Next up, large print. I've just listed 3 of the top large print producers, but there are plenty of others, and other publishers do have their own in-house large print imprints. But at the Library for the Blind, we purchase large print books primarily from Thorndike, Centerpoint, and Random House large print. Thorndike and Centerpoint are exclusively large print. So if you go to their websites, you don't have to worry about accidentally ordering regular size print. But Random House has its own large print imprint. We also use Amazon to find large print editions of books that we may have had in our collection at one point, but have been lost, and we need replacement copies, but they're out of print, so you can only buy them used. Just throwing that out there as a resource. Okay, next, DVDs. The American Council of the Blind curates this really, really handy list of DVDs with described video on them. And what I mean by described video, or described video service, or described audio service, you may have heard about this technology using any of those terms, is that you may have a movie, a commercially produced movie, and there's a feature on it which you have to go into the menu settings to turn on. It's called Described Video Service. And what it does is it enables this narration that occurs in the background once the movie or show starts, in which the narrator will describe the physical setting, the background, maybe even the style or the color of the clothes that the characters are wearing, the actions of their characters that aren't implied by dialogue. My favorite example, the Sound of Music, that scene where Maria von Trapp is sort of standing on a grassy hill and the camera is kind of doing a 360 on her. You might have a narrator in the background saying something to the effect of, a woman in a dress is standing on a grassy hill overlooking other mountains, and there's skies, there are clouds in the sky, something to that effect. If you have never actually watched a video with described video, you can easily find examples on YouTube. But this list of DVDs that the American Council of the Blind curates has direct links to the Amazon product pages where you can actually go and purchase them. Then there's a service called NFB Newsline, and this is available to certainly patrons who qualify for our services at the Library for the Blind. But if you have patrons in your public libraries or in your academic libraries who are not members and don't want to become members of our service, if they still qualify for our service, they would also qualify for the National Federation for the Blind's Newsline service. And the Newsline service consists of over 500 publications, newspapers, popular magazines, available on demand 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Like Bookshare and Learning Ally, this product is computer generated narration. So it's text to speech, it's a computer voice, it's not human narration, but it provides access to a lot of great content free of charge for those who qualify. Next up, the North Carolina Reading Service. The NCRS provides news and information from North Carolina newspapers 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. These newspapers include the New Bern Sun Journal, Greenville Daily Reflector, Wilmington Star News, and probably a few others. Their service also has special programs like Symphony Notes, Salute of Veterans, Everyday, Legal Matters, and more. And we've provided the contact information if you would like to learn more about them. We have actually partnered with them on several local recordings of books authored by North Carolinians. In fact, we had one of their narrators narrate a book written by Governor Cooper's father about 10 years ago called Between the Creeks. And then finally, we've touched a little bit on Brailing resources earlier in the presentation. I thought we'd go into a little more detail. We have two services that we mainly use at the Library for the Blind to braille what we need to have brailled for our patrons. We used to have a brailleist on staff, but she retired in 2016, and it was the powers that be decided that instead of hiring a successor, that we would start outsourcing our brailing needs. And when I say our brailing needs, I'm talking about brailing for programs, brailing our semi-annual newsletter, brailing a couple of books each year written by North Carolinian authors that we want to add to our collection, things of that nature. So the first is Correction Enterprises. There's a brailing unit at the Scotland Correctional Facility in Laurinburg, North Carolina. They do a lot of brailing for the Department of Public Instruction. They do a lot of other brailing jobs for different organizations, and we use them on a regular basis. The second is Metroline Association for the Blind. The MAB works with clients to find cost-effective solutions for their accessible documentation needs. They'll do large print, they'll do audio CDs and accessible PDF documents. So MAB is a really great resource to point towards patrons who need individual services, making documents more accessible. But we have used them to do a couple of books as well. And one final note, based on that question about the induction loop and whether organizations have to purchase that technology. Something to keep in mind is that as you begin to undertake, as you continue to undertake your plans to make your services more accessible, you could consider applying for grants. Some of the stuff would be great for LSTA grants, either planning grants or multi-year grants. Just throwing it out there.
Okay, so now that brings us to our library, and the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled. So we are the free public library for North Carolina residents who have a visual, physical, or reading disability. Even if it's a permanent, or if either it's a permanent or temporary disability, patrons have access to materials such as talking books and our talking book players, Braille and large print books, assistive technology like a breast switch, loudspeaker, and a remote control for their talking book player. Everything, all of our physical media is delivered to our patrons free matter for the blind, and our library also has programming held throughout the year. So we're currently having our summer reading program, which lasts from June to the end of August, and then we'll have our writing contest followed by our winter reading program. We've also have local programs such as tactile tours. We've had a cooking program, and we've been experimenting with virtual programming since the pandemic has started. And we've got it had a rocky start, but we're getting, we're stumbling, but we're finding what works. We're learning more about what works. And so as far as the virtual program goes, not all of our patrons have internet access, but with Zoom, they can still access it through, a landline phone. So we'll describe to them the different buttons they can hit on their regular phone to interact with the Zoom presenter. So, Josh?
Okay, and a little bit about our actual collections. We have access to over 100,000 audiobooks, and that's growing every day. We're adding we're adding close to about 5,000 new audiobooks a year now. We have access to over 20,000 Braille titles, both in physical form and downloadable e-Braille. We have on site over 21,000 large print titles. We have about 650 or so described video DVDs, as well as another 400 or 500 old style VHS described videotapes. We have books in all different languages, and the variety of languages is only increasing since we have recently entered into what is called the Marrakesh Treaty. The Marrakesh Treaty was signed into law in 2019 by former President Trump. It had been in the works for a couple of years. Congress does its own thing on its own time. But the Marrakesh Treaty basically opens the borders for all participating countries to distribute and to share accessible books across borders, across the globe. We're now getting books in Arabic that we didn't have before. We're getting books, huge numbers of books from Spain. And we've had Spanish books, but they weren't necessarily from Spain. We're getting a lot of Canadian French books, Chinese books, and I think we're just sort of hitting the tip of the iceberg as this treaty really gets underway. What else can I tell you about it?
Well,
Yes,
I would just also want to point out like some additional Spanish books that might not be from Mexico, but some of the other Central America or South America countries.
Very true. That's a good point. I mean, each region has its own dialect, and if you have a patron who maybe originates from Peru, and you give them a bunch of Spanish books that originated in Mexico, they might complain. We've had that happen before. Okay, what else can I tell you about our collection? So,
excuse me, I also want to, I forgot to mention that this is a service that libraries can also take a part of as well. So your libraries are eligible to have an institutional or demo account where you would have a talking book player and a deposit collection of talking books, large print books, Braille books, also a demonstration version of Bard where you can download from the National Library Service collection. And so with Bard, you can probably download as many books as we have in our collection that your phone can hold. They won't be deleted unless you decide to delete them. and they, I mean, you don't have to wait for additional copies. They're just there for you to download whenever you want to.
That's a great point. Unlike sort of traditional audiobook lending models in libraries, where libraries purchase a certain number of digital copies that can be borrowed at any given time, we have no such limits for our patrons. So our patrons, if when the next James Patterson book hits the collection, if 1,000 patrons want to read it all at once, they can. And I think that
And
kind of
also we.
Go ahead, Clint.
Oh, I was just gonna say like an interesting story. I was just gonna tell them about an interesting story about one of our patrons who downloaded everything from the NOS collection. That was like what, back maybe 3 years ago.
It was a couple of years ago. So
Do you remember that, Josh?
Yeah, I do. And we may have gone over this right at the beginning, but just in case we didn't, the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled, or NLS as we've referred to it, is a branch of the Library of Congress. And we are then a branch of or a network participant of the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled. Each state has at least one of us. Some states have more. But together we comprise the National Network of Libraries for the Blind and Print Disabled. And most of our audiobook collection comes from the National Library Service, and BARD, the Braille and Audio Reading Download Service, is run by the National Library Service. Okay, and I think we've got plenty of time for questions.
Josh, we have a quick question from Joan asking, do you have information about some of the many services that you offer that we can relay to patrons and staff? You offer so many services.
We do. We have, the first stop would be to, our website. And what, Clint, if you could just paste our website address into the chat box for everyone, that would be great.
There we go.
And we have brochures, although I think they're probably in the process of being redone because we just got a new phone system.
Right.
Clint, what else can we point our participants to in terms of getting more information?
Well, the website's going to be our biggest. It's going to be, everything that you need to know about our library. I'll even put the helpful information section in the chat too.
And
this will tell you about our digital talking books. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, we're also pretty prolific on Facebook and Twitter, social media.
Yes. Facebook, Twitter. Those are the main ones that we use. We also have an Instagram too. Do we accept audiobook donations?
We do not. Well, okay, there's a caveat to that. If in terms of an audiobook donation, if you are the author yourself and you either narrated it yourself or you paid for someone to narrate it and you still own the full production and distribution rights for that audio narration, and you have the files in a format that we could use, so MP3s or WAV files, then it's possible. But if someone wanted to, donate their, their downloaded Audible version of the latest James Patterson novel, we can't take that.
I also have a question that was submitted to me privately asking, are there any volunteer or professional opportunities to help with the collections remotely?
That's a great question. In terms of actual collections work, it would be a little more difficult because I'm not sure that the state would allow for us to install our back-end ILS system on a non-state library computer owned by someone who does not also does not work for the state. But we do have volunteer opportunities that are remote, and I think I'll maybe Clint could probably speak to them a little bit more.
So did you already talk about the book rating system
There is I have not talked
project,
about
Josh?
no, that I have not.
Okay. Okay, so that would be the main one for remote volunteer opportunities. Well, now we have had volunteers who have read for us remotely, but they do have they have studio grade equipment at their house or access to it. During the pandemic, we've had some volunteers stop. They didn't come into the library. We had, when we were sending out our newsletter, we had some volunteers come by, pick up a box of them, fold them, and help prepare them to send to some of our patrons across the state. And so other than that, we don't really have remote volunteer opportunities.
Is that a practice that you feel like will continue indefinitely, or is that something that you plan to change?
It's a shame we don't have
We
our
haven't
volunteer
thought about
services
changing it.
coordinator on the call. I think
Yes.
we are getting more requests for remote volunteer work. I know I've fielded a few that were sent to me. There's certainly the Rating Unrated Books project, and maybe I should go into a little more detail about that, come to think of it. So this is probably going to sound kind of like a foreign concept to many of you on the call, because you don't really see this much in public or academic libraries. But up until 2013 or so, every book that the National Library Service added to the collection was given a rating for whether the book had sexual content, strong language, or violence. And this was done, and this was decided upon many decades ago, because in our model of service, we are often choosing books for patrons based on their subject preferences. So patrons can certainly call in and tell us what they want. They can send us order forms that we send out to them every other month. But a lot of our patrons prefer for us to choose the books for them based on their subject preferences, genre preferences, author preferences, series preferences. And either our system, our ILS, will choose the books for them, or a human reader advisor will choose books for them. Because there's so much taken out of patrons' hands in this kind of a model, patrons can't just flip through a book on a shelf and look to see whether the book has objectionable content or content that they would find objectionable. So these books that we get into our collection are given these ratings so that we can try to not send books out to patrons that will offend them. But in 2013, 2014, the National Library Service started appropriating commercially produced audiobooks. And in that process, it lost access to the ability to rate them, because the commercial book producers are not providing that information in the same way that NLS's narrators were and still are for a percentage of the collection. So we have this project called Rating Unrated Books. And what it entails is it's really a national effort among the network libraries for the blind to listen to these commercially produced audiobooks that are put into our collection and to give them those ratings that formerly NLS would have provided. Up until the pandemic, we had volunteers working on this. Then when the pandemic hit, we suddenly had a whole bunch of staff members who needed work to do that they could do remotely. So in the last year, well, year and 2 months really, we've just in our library alone in North Carolina, we've rated over almost 700 of these books, which is over 10% of the total number of books that this project has rated since its inception in 2015. As our staff members begin returning on site over the following months, we will be transitioning back towards using volunteers for this Rating Unrated Books project. So this would be an opportunity, especially for people who like to read a lot. This would be a great opportunity to get involved. And I highly encourage you to email me, since I've sort of run the program, if you are interested. In case my email address isn't anywhere on these slides, it's just joshua.berkov, B as in boy, E-R-K-O-V as in Victor, at ncdcr.gov.
Folks, please continue to submit questions. One of the common kind of questions or discussion points that came up in the Google form that we sent out previously, there were many library workers who shared that their libraries have inaccessible layouts, low shelving, automatic doors that don't work, shelves that are too close together for wheelchair users to turn around, just physical challenges alone, but also lacking like a structured approach to dealing with those and advocating for changes. Do y'all have any recommendations or partners that our libraries could get in touch with about advocating for those sorts of changes to their spaces?
First thing that comes to mind is really looking at, in terms of space and in terms of like space between shelves, is really looking at ADA compliance for wheelchair accessibility. I think as public, public institutions, state institutions, most of our libraries are really required to have our facilities be ADA compliant. So it's really from my perspective, it's really a legal issue. And if the library isn't making their spaces fully ADA compliant, the system or the county or the city could have a legal problem on its hands, a very costly one. In terms of organizations, I definitely recommend them getting in touch with, whether you're talking about visually impaired patrons, getting in touch with the National Federation for the Blind or the American Council of the Blind, or some of these advocacy organizations that already exist. Tell them what your problems are and see if they can help. They probably already have connections to many of the more localized powers that be who need convincing that things need to change. Trying to think of other ideas. Clint, do you have anything to add?
That was going to be my suggestion, what you had said.
I'm trying, is there anything else? I mean, as they say, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And I would even go so far as to solicit the help of your patrons who do have disabilities. Put together an advocacy group of your own. Go to if you're a public library, go to your county or city board meetings. If you're an academic library, most academic libraries have friends of the library organizations, and we have one. And they can also be a great resource, not just in terms of getting support from the administration, but also offering financial help to make some of your spaces and collections more accessible. They can really help if you're interested in providing accessible technology, not just the free stuff, but the expensive stuff too, like the JAWS screen readers. You ask your friends' organizations to get involved.
Thanks, Josh, for those suggestions. We also have somebody in the chat, Kimberly, who shared, in my experience, inaccessible shelving is ADA compliant when there are mechanisms in place for patrons to page items. Places are grandfathered in and don't change spacing because of cost and competing priorities. Yeah, that's a really good point to bring up. Thank you for that.
That is a good point. That's a very good point.
Teresa's asking, reading YA books sounds like a great volunteer opportunity for teens. Would standard podcasting equipment be good enough? Do you need professional voice actors?
I wouldn't say you need professional voice. No, you don't need professional voice actors. All of our books that we record in our library are read by volunteers that we audition. So I feel like, depending on the type of equipment they have and what kind of space they have. So I've been since we've been in the pandemic, I haven't been able to access our library. The only thing I've recorded is our newsletter. And what I've done is gotten a microphone and I've used my closet to kind of act like a studio. And it's okay, but it's nothing I would want to, put on our I would submit to our national collection. Like I said before, the volunteers that we do have that have read books for us outside of our studios they have studio grade equipment at their house. This is something that they normally, well, I guess you could say that some of them are professionals, and Josh also said that the North Carolina Radio Reading Service has done some projects for us as well. So I wouldn't make any promises that we would take it, but we could listen to it and see and go from there.
Yeah, I think that
send in a sample.
The biggest risk with just using standard podcasting recording equipment is that chances are you're not in a soundproof environment, and mics pick up all sorts of distortions that you might not hear when you just listen back to your recording, but the distortions are there, and sometimes they become amplified in the conversion process to our format.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Just going back briefly to the issue with places being grandfathered in and using pages to get books for patrons as a means of getting around to ADA. One thing that comes to mind is that really takes away the patron's right to privacy, the patron's right to browse the collection without any help from someone else. So if a patron wants, if a patron has an information need that he or she may find embarrassing, that patron may feel that the need is embarrassing enough not to ask for help. Whereas a fully sighted patron could use the OPAC, could go to the shelves and find the information that the patron needs. So it isn't just the way I see it, it isn't just about providing the resources, it's also about providing the same level of anonymity that non-disabled patrons enjoy.
Maybe not even anonymity, but like autonomy as well, that I think there's, as you shared with programming considerations, that's a whole aspect of it where you mentioned, if people don't want your help, just let them kind of be and know that you're available to them. But there's a sense that really what people want is just autonomy.
Mm-hmm. That's very true. And true accessibility is, I think, defined by there being full parity between a patron without disabilities and a patron with disabilities being able to access the collection on their own terms.
We have just hit 3 o'clock. And so shortly we'll be transitioning to breakout rooms. Joshua and Clint, thank you so much for this presentation. Is it all right in the follow-up email if I share your contact information in case people want to get in touch with you?
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Oh yeah,
And,
that's fine.
and I think we'll be in at least 2 of the breakout rooms. Is that correct?
Yes,
Yep.
definitely. So folks, stick around if you'd like to attend those conversations. Those will be hosted by myself and Lauren Clossy.